Alright, this video looks at giving you some tips and tricks on handling questions, exam type questions that are marked based on levels of response. Alright, now we are looking here at the geography syllabus, the geography exam, specifically for Singapore by Cambridge. Alright, but you will realize that the skills that we are going to discuss today are universally applicable to any piece of prose that you write that is meant to be persuasive. So, argumentative essays in English, right? Persuasive essays for literature. Right? These are all similar type skills, right? That you would use for these types of questions. Alright, let's first and foremost start by identifying the question. Now, a typical open-ended question, alright, or levels of response question or persuasive essay would require the candidate's judgment and the justification of that judgment. You need to make a decision one way or the other and justify your decision. And typically, it looks like these. How far do you agree? To what extent do you agree? How true? How successful? But the most common ways of expressing such a question would be assess and evaluate. Now, the Cambridge exam describes and defines the command word assess as thus: using all known facts of the situation, decide on the significance. Decide on the significance. Now, when the command word tells you to decide on the significance, it means you are to write a persuasive essay. Now, we all know that we can't write a good persuasive essay unless we present both sides. We need to acknowledge that opposing views exist so that we are not accused of bias, right? And if you were to look at the Cambridge scoring rubric for such a question, you will realize that this is clearly reflected. Only one side of the judgment or both sides of the judgment, right? So we need to establish what those two sides are because we need to decide on the significance. Okay? So, how do we handle open-ended questions or persuasive questions or questions marked based on levels of response? Firstly, identify the command word. If the command word requires an opinion, a judgment, then it falls under the category which we call open-ended, persuasive essay. And then once that is the case, start looking for the two sides. Okay? Start looking for the two sides. Okay. So let's take a sample question. Question B from 2010 November paper. Describe and assess. Now, describe, we know, it just means tell me what you see. The word assess, as we have seen earlier, it says take a decision, right? So we need to take a decision on what is the topic? The two methods of coastal management. Okay? So, what do we do? The first thing to do would be to decide what those two sides are. Now, when you assess something, something is either positive or negative, effective or ineffective, successful or unsuccessful, and so on. So, unless the question has told you very specifically what those two sides will be, you have to decide what those two sides are. So let's say for this question, we want to say positives and negatives. Assess the two methods. The positives of the methods are, negatives of the methods are. Alright? So draw up a table, a planning table, and firstly put the positives and the negatives. Establish both sides. Now you realize that the positives and the negatives would be meaningless unless you list down the factors that you are here to discuss. So in this case, the factors are defined for you: gabions and beach nourishment. So in the column to the left, put gabions and beach nourishment. And then you fill in the facts. Alright? And this is how you plan for the essay. Establish the two sides. Establish the factors. Alright? Now, once you have planned this, then it's time to start writing. Now, you will realize by the end of this video that the structure for writing a successful geography question on levels, open-ended geography question marked on levels of response is similar to persuasive essays, argumentative essays, and so on. Alright, the skills, as I've mentioned, are universal, so you can cross-apply it to all these various uses. Now, first and foremost, we start with an introductory paragraph. An introductory paragraph is exactly that. It answers the question deliberately and directly. Alright? So if we go back to this question, describe and assess the two methods of coastal management, we would say that gabions, that is one of the factors that is listed, are successful, effective, or gabions are not successful, ineffective. And we do the same for beach nourishment. That is your introductory paragraph. Answer the question directly, deliberately, so that you reduce the possibility of you missing the point and detracting off topic. Alright? Now, once you have given your answer, the next step would be to justify your answer. So, the way you justify your answer is to discuss the given factor. What is the given factor? The given factor is the factor that is listed in the question. In the question that we have been discussing, the given factors are gabions and beach nourishment. But if we contrast this to another type of question, let's say D, 2008, paper 2, with reference to examples, outline government policy. In this case, the given factor here are government policy. It's not defined which government policy. It's up to you to decide which government policy. But as long as it is a government policy, we can talk about the two sides. And in this question, the two sides have been decided for you. It's successful. So, if we go back to our planning table, instead of positive and negative, it would read successful, unsuccessful, policy number 1, policy number 2. Alright? So planning, we plan this the same way. We just need to adapt the information. Okay? So, going back to writing, we deal with the factor. We need to say, firstly, why is the factor important? Why is this so? Explain. And if you can, give examples to justify. Alright? Nothing better to justify an argument than a real life example. So give your examples to justify it, and then say how this proves or disproves the question. Okay? Now, once we have done that, because we want to build a convincing argument, if there are any other supporting factors, we should deal with them as well. Okay? Supporting factors. Factors that deal with or support your stand. So if you are positive about something, all the factors that you deal with should prove that, right? Echo that. It should support your stand. Then after you've done one side of the argument, you now need to move to the other side of the argument. Now you realize that if you were to say, let's go back to this planning table, if you were to say that gabions are positive, gabions are great, gabions are effective, and then suddenly say that gabions are ineffective, you would be contradicting yourself. Alright? And any persuasive essay that contradicts itself no longer is persuasive. Therefore, we need what is called a transition paragraph. Now, a transition paragraph is a very simple line. Simple, yet powerful. Because what the transition paragraph says is, I acknowledge their opposing views. I don't necessarily agree with them, but in the spirit of being fair, I acknowledge that they exist. Right? Now there is a difference. If you acknowledge that they exist, you may not necessarily agree they are important, but they exist nonetheless. It also signals to the reader or the examiner that you are about to deal with something on the contrary, but you don't believe it. So that is the most important thing. You don't believe it. So it doesn't contradict your former argument. All right? So that is important. And once you've done that, you move on to the opposing factor, all right, in exactly the same way. So if you say that it is effective, all right, for example, let's go back to this table. If you say that Gabions are positive, they are effective, they are successful. Say, however, I acknowledge that some people think that they don't work, and they don't work in these ways. All right? Now you realize that you are acknowledging the opposition, but you are not contradicting yourself. Your stand still remains. All right? Do that for as many other factors as you have, and then you come to the crux, the weighing paragraph. Now, most candidates at this point lose themselves one of two ways. Either they lose themselves because they lost track of their argument and decide to take on the opposing view, or they lose themselves in the sense that they run out of factors to discuss and they don't know what else to say. The weighing paragraph essentially takes everything that you have said before. Don't bring in anything new. Just take everything that you have said before and put it one against the other. So, positive for factor 1 vis-a-vis negative for factor 1. Let's go back to the table again. Gabions are good because, however, some people think that they are limited in this manner. Right? The juxtaposition, and then say, nonetheless, I still think that Gabions are positive because. So, the weighing paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, the weighing paragraph really is a paragraph for you to compare what you have said, take stock of what you have said, and then make a comparison. Justify, using the comparison, then justify your stand, your decision. Alright? And then finally, you end your conclusion the same way you started the introductory paragraph, alright, by restating your answer. Therefore, Gabions are effective, for example. Okay? So that essentially is how you handle an open-ended question, a persuasive or argumentative question, all right, in any context. First, decide the two sides, and then figure out the factors, all right, and then present one side, transition, present the other side, compare the two, and then you are done.